Welcome back to Module 3-3. In this lecture, I will talk about layout and positioning. Through this module, you will learn about flow and float. Then you will practice several different design skills like float layout, jello layout, fixed layout, and absolute layout. There are a lot of information from textbook. Even though you don't understand every detail, you should read it and get a big idea of the chapter. Later, when you develop your own web pages, there may be certain click learning moment. I hope you may experience it. Reading is a very important requirement for the learning in this class. You need to download the files and prepare class activities. There are two main things from this activity. One is a review for previous issue about floating right. The other one is a concept and steps for flow and float for layout design. There is no hands-on practice in this activity. Do you remember one layout issue from previous class? Float right makes elixir section to float right, but it doesn't make it move to the top. So to solve this issue, we moved all elixir section to the beginning of the body in Launch HTML. At that time, I told you we would talk about layout in the next class, so I will talk about positioning today. To understand float, you have to understand flow. Flow is actually what the browser uses to lay out a page of HTML elements. The browser starts at the top of any HTML file and follows the flow of elements from top to bottom, displaying each element it encounters. So the first element in a document is displayed first, then a line break, followed by the second element, then a line break, and so on, from the top to the bottom. That's flow. The block elements put a line break between each one. They flow top to bottom with a line break in between each element. Inline elements are flowed next to each other horizontally from top left to bottom right. They will be shrunken or expanded when you resize the web browser. This describes the flow with block elements and inline elements. Float might be one little property, but the way it works is closely tied to how the browser flows elements and content onto the page. The float property first takes an element and floats it as far left or right as it can based on the value of float. It does not move up above blocked elements. The floating section will be floated far left or right from the place where the element is. It then flows all the content below it around the element. Of course, there are more details, so let's take a look at. These would be good steps to follow to use float. Step 1. Give it an identity in HTML. For example, use div with ID. Step 2. Make sure the element's HTML is just below the element you want it to float under. This is what happened to launch.html. Step 3. Give it proper width. Step 4. Add the float property, either left or right. For example, in step 1, you give ID as amazing for a paragraph. In step 2, you move the amazing block under certain element. In this case, it is under the first heading 2. In step 3, you give a proper width. In step 4, you add the float property as right. As the result, the amazing block floats to the right under first heading 2. The rest elements fill right side of the amazing block. Do you remember? To fix this float right issue from Launch HTML, we put the element HTML just below the banner logo. It had width and property value already, so it fixed the problem. In this activity, I want you to analyze existing HTML and CSS files. There is no hands-on activity. Since you start based on existing files, you have to study and analyze them first before you modify them. In index.html, recognize four logical groups: header, main, sidebar, and footer. Each group has its own type ID. In stopwatch.css, you should be able to understand each selector, format, effect, and result. Select body has a background color, font family, font size, and margin properties. After footer, there are heading 1, heading 2, class slogan, and bin heading. Then two pseudo classes, a link and a visited. Analyze header, main, sidebar, and footer with index.html and stopwatch.css together. Header has a background color, margin, and height. Main has background image, font size, padding, and margin. Sidebar has background image, font size, padding, and margin. Footer has background color, font color, center aligned text, padding, and margin. This is the result of index.html without special layout. In this activity, you will modify stopwatch.css and index.html for good design. However, it is not the answer. You have to practice to be a good web designer. Then later you may create your own design. Add type ID or content from index.html. Be aware where you put closing type tag. Then update the stopwatch.css for all content. Look carefully on margin left auto and margin right auto. If you use auto layout for right and left margin, we call it as rigged or float layout. In your practice, you will use Jello layout. It is a mix of frozen certain given size layout and rigged float layout. You put certain width and put auto margins. Then the browser will give auto margin and put the content in the center. In step 2, make a main with a certain width and float left. In step 3, modify sidebar margin for better design. In step 4, make a footer have a clear left, then no floating contents will be on left side of footer. This is the result. This is one example of design using float, width, margin auto, and clear. However, since this is a design, there would be a lot better ways you may like more. In this activity, you will practice absolute and fixed position. In step 1, add a word image in HTML and set it as absolute position in CSS. Absolute means from the page, so when you scroll, the image will follow scrolling because the position is stuck to the page. In step 2, add a coupon image in HTML and set it as a fixed position in CSS. Fixed means from window, so when you scroll, the position is the same. By the way, position number can be negative, like left negative 9 pixels. This is the result. Resize your web browser and scroll the page. Then you will see the difference between them. Fixed position image is stuck with the screen. Absolute position image is stuck to the web page. So far, we have practiced the float rigged layouts, Jello layout, and frozen layouts. There is a table display layout. We did not cover it here. However, book covers it. We will cover table display layout in the next class after we cover table. This is a review for fixed position and absolute position. This is a review for Jello layout. If you use absolute position instead of floating, you need to calculate each position manually. Z-index decides background or foreground of the selector. If G-index is higher, then it is foreground, lower is background. It may have a negative number. Submit internet URLs after all activities. This is the end of Module 3-3. You have learned the flow and float. Then you have practiced several different design skills like float layout, Jello layout, fixed layout, and absolute layout. See you in Module 3-4.